Hello and welcome to Rauta. I'm Jerry and this time we're episode 18 in the Nordic metal crash course, that is black metal from the 90s. And by now, of course, we have done all the big bands, all the successful ones, and going towards the split up bands, going towards the one that are in the underground. And now people have always more fascination towards the bigger names. That's how success goes, even within black metal, even within underground metal scene. People might say, I listen to underground bands only, and based on lots of stats, not only here on Rauta, but a lot of stats, whether we're talking about social media or sites like Last.fm or whatnot, numbers always back up. Successful bands will invite more people to follow, whereas underground bands, less known bands, people are like, checking out the headline, not interested, I don't even know the name. And as such, I've seen a huge decline from the bigger bands to the smaller bands. But that's how it goes, there's no shame in that, it's just kind of pointing the obvious. So in case you don't know any of these bands, there is no shame either. I mean, it's kind of obvious these bands have faded away long time ago. Some might have some activity, but let's be honest about it. These three bands, that is, they are not exactly known for their activity during recent years, and as such they are kind of forgotten names. But as it is, we have three names from the underground, bands that started their careers already in the mid-90s. Maybe you should know them, maybe not, but we shall discuss them nonetheless. And as with the previous episodes, at least the later ones, I will start from the older, going towards the newer, and then I will comment a little bit on the albums, give you a little bit background information, and maybe spark your interest towards these bands. Maybe not, because like the success goes, oftentimes, the more successful bands are also in many people's opinions, brains, whatever, the better ones. Now, let's start doing, and first we'll head to Bergen area, the home, the cradle of Norwegian black metal for so many bands. And one of the bands that came here a little bit later to the party is Malignant Eternal. Now, technically speaking, this is old because they started with the name Apoplexy in 1991. Now I will show you why it's not really the same thing. Here it is more like black death metal, doing one demo only. So even if it's 1991, you really can't compare it to bands like, say, Burzum or Enslaved from 1991 era from Bergen also. So technically speaking, what started was more like 1994 with their demo from 1995. And that, in a way, really started things going on. That's also the year they released their first album, Tornet, Tower, if I am correct. And a couple of years later, they had the second album, Far Beneath the Sun, and kind of concluding their short career with an album called Alarm 1999. Now, during those years, the band changed a lot. The kind of a change that you would figure out for bands like 10 plus years, but then again, Emperor also did similar changes within rather short amount of time. Maybe not this short, but nonetheless, so this is not something that is out of question. We also know bands like Ulver or Arcturus, to mention a few, to have similar changes. Not exactly the same, obviously, because this one went from more kind of a traditional melodic black metal, the kind of a middle path one, towards the more industrial one. Now, there's a reason why this first era is, in my opinion, clearly the better. But I wouldn't even, jokingly compare these to the better names. And that is a reason. Let's talk about Tornet, for instance. That is kind of the basic Norwegian black metal album from the mid-90s. That's not the most extreme. I'm talking about, tempos, riffs, the atmosphere, production, whatnot. Thing here is, this is more like the middle ground. It's not the most sophisticated, not the most symphonic, not the most melodic, but it's kind of all there. No, it is one of those bands that goes raw, primitive, and all that stuff. So forget whatever you're thinking about now, bands like Ildion or Darkthrone. This has nothing to do with that. This is more about let's do it melodic ways. Let's add keyboards and let's just try to way there. In a way, I think Malignant Eternal could be compared to bands like Dimmu Borgir and the like, maybe Emperor, which is mentioned here. Here it is more like mentions to Samael, but I think it's partially because later on they started changing their style. Samael wouldn't be the first band that comes to my mind from the early material from whatever Malignant Eternal was doing, nor I would really compare it to Emperor. For example, here, Emperor is listed as symphonic black metal, Malignant Eternal is not. But when people get these ideas like, whatever, I'm thinking about this and that band, obviously the big names come first because they're the most listened albums. Malignant Eternal is closer to bands like Carpe Tenebrum, which is also featured in this episode, and also bands like Troll, in a way, Dimmu Borgir and the like. So keyboards are massively there, but then again, it's not really like Obtain Enslavement, nor the later Emperor stuff. Now, Eternity being a very basic album, it's easy to approach, but then you also figure it out. It hasn't aged too well. I mean, compared to nowadays production and all that stuff, and then having a no-name debut album, obviously there's a big difference. You might like the atmosphere, you might like the feeling that it gets you back into 1990s feelings, but whether we're talking about songwriting or production, it feels like, yeah, it's kind of a typical first album. It's no The Mysteries themselves. It's by no means no In the Nightside Eclipse or any of that. There's a big difference between the bands that were like so much more polished, ready, had powerful sound, and then albums like this, which is more demo-ish. It's not bad by no means, but then again, nothing out of ordinary. I mean, there's a big gap between those really good bands and bands like Malignant Eternal's early works. But it's probably something that you should give a go if you like melodic black metal with synthesizers and whatnot. And then you could like figure out like, yeah, it's pretty decent. I can see where these guys are coming from. Now, from that point, you might really hope that the guys were doing same thing but going further, like a lot of bands. So you might say that from Emperor, you might say that about Enslaved Person, what have you. Despite the style, bands usually get to do better songs and also kind of like a better production with the coming budget, more understanding how the album should sound. It was that powerful enough when it comes to guitars, with the drums enough audible, and etc. But unfortunately, Malignant Eternal, in my opinion, went to different direction. And this feels like a lesser version of what was going on, like with the first album. It's like, guys, you're supposed to go that way, not that way. So in my opinion, they went backwards. And with the 20th Century Beast, which is kind of awful with the Number of the Beast cover, like when you remove clean vocals from a melodic heavy metal one, which is definitely leaning on, how the vocals go with the clean vocals and that, you're like, no, don't do it. It's quite horrible, to be honest. And then you have the final album, Alarm, which is clearly more on the industrial side of things. And now you're getting your hopes up. Hey, maybe it's the next Mysticum. Maybe it's the next Diabolicum. Maybe Black Lodge. Maybe something like Aborum. No, it's not. It's more like a waste of time. It's borderline horrible album because it feels like the guys really dropped the ball. It's not super bad, but it's more on the bad than good side. And I felt like the band was all the way decline. So to be a little bit mean here, I would say no wonder they quit. They probably figured out after 4 years we're doing worse and worse and worse by the albums. So instead of like getting better, making more powerful productions, making more interesting songs and albums and all, the bands were like, hey, yeah, we're gonna lose it, we're gonna burn it, and then we're gonna fade away. What essentially happened, according to Metal Archive's data, obviously I don't have the details here, it seems like the band pretty much faded away after year 2000, only to come back for a short while with M Eternal, which was supposed to be like the industrial spin-off of the whole band, and then faded away again. But also it says here that after 2017, the band has more or less come back, probably meaning comeback shows, because obviously there are no albums. Anyway, for me, Malignant Eternal is kind of a side note, which wasn't really on the map when I got a lot of music to listen from the Nordic countries and beyond in the 90s, in the early 2000s when I was trading music and, collecting albums for my compilation and everything was new, and I think this was pretty much dismissed back in the days. I don't know the reason, but now I kind of understand. It made no waves back then, and it surely won't make waves nowadays. It's more like an interesting side note, like, yeah, it's okay band, let's move on. Which brings us to the second band, Carpe Tenebrum from 1995 and onwards, also doing 3 albums with a rather short amount of time. Now they skipped the demo phase entirely, at least official recordings, and made clearly the first wave 1997 and then ended their career with 2002 album. You might see a pattern here based on certain One reviews, but don't take One reviews as a kind of a guide. Rate Your Music is way better when it comes to voting system, but it makes no sense for me to just show it here because you can do it yourself. This is more like, here it is mentioned, black and symphonic black metal, early, meaning these 2 first albums, which are done by Astenu, mostly known for his work in Dimmu Borgir and Covenant, and also Nagash, known for his work for Dimmu Borgir and Covenant and Troll. So 2 guys who also have their own, or had their own symphonic, melodic black metal bands with keyboards and all. I mean, Covenant went more for the industrial side, but the early album is basically Emperor Worship. Pretty good too. Troll, on the other hand, is more melodic, a little bit folkier and drum machine, but kind of carved from the same tree. So, based on that, what else could Carpe Tenebrum be more than synth-filled, melodic, symphonic black metal? And unfortunately, it's actually better than, I would say, most Troll material out there. Roughly the same level as the Covenant debut album, but nothing really beyond that. Majestic Nothingness was something I heard back in the days, and I remember it being quite good. Yes, it feels still, 25 years later, more than 27 actually, quite good. I mean, you have the kind of a patterns like, okay, these guys can write songs, they have decent melodies, they have something like keyboards used in a nice ways. It's pretty goddamn listenable album these days, but not making big waves. When I compare this to my favorite black metal albums, whether we're talking about raw end or more symphonic or melodic ones, well, this ain't no Dissection, this ain't no Emperor, this ain't no Enslaved Mayhem, what have you. But it's still pretty good. And I mean, very much like, yes, this hasn't really lost the magic. Feeling kind of a nostalgic going back to these, but still kind of remembering why I never got this as a CD on my collection. But definitely worth checking out if you like the 1990 vibes when it comes to black metal. Mirror Hate Painting 2 years later. Horrible cover if you ask me. This is basically the equivalent of covers compared to nowadays artificial intelligence or AI covers. I mean, look at it, it's bad. It's like, hey, let's do computer generated graphics, let's put symbols there, and it looks crap. Anyway, the album itself is pretty decent. Pretty much the same level as the first album, Majestic Nothingness. Maybe a little bit seeping into different direction, but I would say pretty comparable. So these two are actually like, hey, like 2 brothers. They are quite well done. Maybe not exactly super good, but something that, yeah, haven't lost their magic over the years or the decades really. And they kind of show why Astenu and Nagash, like, why they were actually, or still are, skilled musicians. However, in my opinion, Covenant went really bad, and well, Troll is still active, so maybe that's where the magic went after this. However, Dreaded Chaotic Rain, which is just Astenu's own solo project by now, and losing the other member, this suddenly went totally different direction. It's like a demo version of black death metal, like horrible drum machine, doesn't really sound good. And the songs are not that symphonic or melodic black metal anymore. It's more like, yeah, I want to play some B or C grade death metal, blend it in with black metal and see how it floats. This also points out to the trend what was going on in the early 2000s and late 90s in Norway, like bands like Zyglan appearing, and suddenly all those black metal bands that had stemmed from, death metal roots were going back to death metal. Suddenly death metal was not to be mocked, but done again, the kind of new wave of death metal, something that also Behemoth did back in the days. And Dreaded Chaotic Rain is more like a poor man's version of those bands, where a lot of bands which had like full lineups and all that stuff, more focused with songwriting, Dreaded Chaotic Rain was more like a weird offshoot, like, why are you doing that? You're not skilled enough to do it by yourself. You have a horrible drum machine. The songwriting isn't really good. Overall production feels like this is your first bedroom demo. Why on earth it's an album? Maybe Hammerhard felt like there is selling potential and decided to release it anyway. I would say you should have put it out as a demo and then figure out the weak points, the flaws and whatnot, and upgraded it to full album. That's how I feel about it. So, from black metal perspective or even death metal perspective, Dreaded Chaotic Rain can be just dismissed. But these two first albums are still worth a go. And then we have the last band of the pile, Joyless, which is technically speaking a Forgotten Woods spin-off. Meaning the guys who did Forgotten Woods decided to do something else. And here it is as such. On Metal Archive's site listed as black metal / post-punk, early, depressive rock, later, which is very true. Now, the first album, Unlimited Hate, I remember this being around trading things and all that stuff, and it was because of Forgotten Woods. Forgotten Woods did their own style, a little bit depressive, kind of a so-called suicidal black metal one, but not really like that. And this has some of the same material. But what is also weird is it has some trashier parts, like this opening track, which is way too lengthy, lots of repetition here. And then you have black metal parts, which are more like Forgotten Woods leftovers. Then you have these post-punk things, which are like fitting together forcefully. So it feels more like a compilation of ideas, whatever the guys were like, hey, we have some Forgotten Woods leftovers, we have some trashier parts, we have some post-punk parts, let's put it in one box and let people judge it. And the result is over 1 hour of a mess. Some people obviously like it, that's kind of a given. People always like weird music and weird compilations. And there are moments when you really feel like, hey, this is actually pretty good. And then you're like, what the hell, man? I don't even like it. It's a pretty weird album, maybe more out of curiosity thing to listen to it, rather than like, hey, Forgotten Woods spin-off, yeah, I'm in for it. I mean, take certain parts, and yeah, it's Forgotten Woods, but you could really just remove the best parts and stash it with your Forgotten Woods albums, and the rest you can just let it go. Now, after that, the band went definitely different directions. I'm here only going to tackle the full albums because this definitely does not have anything to do with black metal except for the past. Wisdom and Arrogance. Female vocals, weird rock, depressive rock, I would say kind of like experimental rock without support, same thing. Some people, as you can see, 99% based 2 reviews. People who really must love this kind of stuff. But has nothing to do with metal music as such, and even less with black metal, apart from the past, the link to the other bands. These are weird albums in my opinion, and not the kind of stuff that I enjoy. I mean, I get it why some people are like, I love them. But if you're coming here for black metal purposes, like checking out some missed gems and pearls and whatnot, you can skip pretty much the whole band. Unlimited Hate, like I said, has certain parts why it's probably worth giving a shot. But then again, you must embrace for yourself for disappointment. And these two other albums, you only listen to them if you're a big Joyless fans. But like I said, it's basically like two different bands. The difference is kind of a similar, like take Bathory's black metal album and then the thrash and Viking metal albums, and like it's the same band. I get to like both Bathory's Viking metal albums and black metal albums. I don't like the thrash metal albums. Even I'm a thrash metal fan. So coming from this comparison to Joyless, the first album, kind of okay, the rest not so much. And even if they are not bad, it's totally different genre. I want to emphasize it because it's just like a different band really altogether. So 3 forgotten bands with 3 kind of different styles. If I had to pick winner from this pile and like save your time a little bit, I would say go for Carpe Tenebrum. It's still, with those 2 first albums, rather likable. For Malignant Eternal, maybe the first album, and with a little bit of care, with a little bit of embracing for impact, maybe Unlimited Hate from Joyless. The rest of the albums, not that good, really. I mean, you really have to like digging through trash if you want to enjoy them all, but that is, of course, up to you. Now, the next episode will feature even more cult acts. So towards the end we go, towards the smaller bands we go. Now, I hope I gave you some ideas what to check out and what not. Let me know what you think about it. Did you hear these bands back in the days, in the late 90s or early 2000s? Or did you hear from about these bands for the first time now? I'm looking forward to hear your comments. What do you think about the albums? What do you think about the music? And off we go. Take care. Bye-bye. See you soon with the next video.